Chapter 6. Oh, Zhengli, sitting behind Zhengping, sighed lensly. Zhengli took out his phone and opened the mission prompt that only he could see. Find the final boss who has been hiding in this underdeveloped world for 15 years and kill him. The victor will become the next clearer. Take all the powers and items he has obtained in the game to the real world and have one wish granted. This was a hidden mission the system had suddenly issued a few days ago. It was also called a shortcut mission. According to the system's exacting rules, wanting to clear was total lunacy. A great master had once calculated that to finish the game entirely, you had to go through over 100 worlds, and the difficulty level gradually escalated, with each world having mortal dangers. Even if you cleared, you probably wouldn't be human anymore, but a machine without emotions. In all of history, only one person had fully cleared. 15 years ago, after clearing, this person had disappeared. Some people said his powers had reached the level of a god's. It was likely he could have killed the chief deity and become the new ruler of creation. Zhengli didn't understand that. How could a person who had been tortured by the system for thousands of years choose to become the new chief deity and torture other people who were suffering like he had? At the time, a temporary teammate who had gone through over 10 levels had told Zhengli that a person who had lived thousands of years and had powers far greater than the average person would probably see ordinary people like ants. You couldn't analyze his thoughts using an average person's way of thinking. He had become a god's attitude towards humanity would only be pitiless and domineering. Originally, no one could believe that there was someone who could finish the game. The majority of levelers were like Zhengli, choosing to get by. It didn't matter who they got by with. They lived day to day, staying in each world as long as they could. Who knew whether they would die in the next world? Until the first clearer had appeared 15 years earlier and given everyone hope. So there really was someone who could escape the system forever. So it really was possible to live this never-ending cruel survival game. Everyone began to strive to finish levels, not getting by passively anymore. But all these years later, there had been no second clearer. When Zhengli had once more given up entirely, a hidden mission had suddenly unlocked. If you completed this mission, you could become a clearer. It wasn't only Zhengli. Quite a few people had triggered the hidden mission. These people had apparently formed a clearing league, wanting to clear together. But this mission was very dangerous. No one really knew how powerful the final boss was. But this unopened world was illustrious. Over hundreds of years, not a single player had made it through this world alive. No one knew how dangerous this world was, but it was definitely certain death. Zhengli was only a new leveler. While he'd received the hidden mission, he hadn't dared to go to this frightening world to die. He'd only wanted to keep drifting along, living from one world to the next. But he really was unlucky. He had been caught by the Clearing League's people. The League's boss didn't dare to go to the unopened world to investigate for himself, so he had forced Zhengli to come test the waters. If he hadn't gone, he would have been killed. All around was death, so he may as well go try his luck. What if his luck was good, and he cleared? So Zhengli had accepted the assignment and was conveyed to this world. Before entering the world, Zhengli used all the defenses he had equipped from the system, afraid that he would be killed as soon as he entered. When he woke up, he found he was lying in a pitch-black room and was so scared he didn't dare to move. He only dared to go up and turn on the lights after lying down for a whole day. Then he discovered that he had been lying in a basement. Zhengli thought that perhaps this was an extreme survival little dark room game. Of course, he couldn't open the door. If he opened it, there would be a trap, and he would definitely die. He searched the room for clues, but this game was too hard. He couldn't find anything. He could only wait to die. Zhengli was trapped in this basement for fully 7 days. He ate all the instant noodles and drank all the bottled water in the room, then began to starve. On the 7th day, he lay on the bed and pulled up the system control panel to pick out an item that would give him a painless death. He didn't want to die of hunger. Just then, there was a knock on the basement door. Zhengli curled up under the quilt in fear, his whole body trembling. After knocking for a while, the person walked in. Zhengli bit the corner of the quilt and started to request the item and resign himself to his fate. Just as he was about to click confirm request, someone tore away the quilt. Standing in front of him, the landlady said, "I sent you a WeChat message and you didn't answer. I called you and you didn't pick up. You're still a student. If you don't have money to pay the rent, I can give you a 2-day extension, but you can't disappear without saying a word." Shaking, he got several hundred yuan out of his wallet and said, "If I give you the money, will you not kill me? Is this enough money?" The landlady was astonished. "Why would I kill you? Have you spent too much time playing games at night? There's still 500 missing. Forget it. You can give it to me with next month. Also, the estate is taking a survey of residents. Remember to give me a copy of your residence registration booklet. Residence registration booklet. Junli looked foolishly at the landlady. What? Have you lost it? You young people are always losing things left and right. It's all right. If you've lost it, go get a residence certificate from the community center. Then go to the Public Security Bureau and make it up. Before leaving, the lady also told him, you should get out in the sun more. There isn't a drop of color in your face. When the landlady had gone, Junli pondered for a long time, thinking that he had probably completed the initial mission by surviving in the little dark room for 7 days. So the landlady had come to issue his next mission. It's lucky I resisted going out, or else I'd be dead by now. Junli inwardly rejoiced that his passive mentality had saved his life. After going out and getting familiar with the terrain, he found the community center and had the certificate issued. After getting the certificate, no one gave him his next mission. Junli was hungry, so he went to the shopping mall next door to eat. He spent some time getting familiar with using his phone. After determining that there was still a good amount of money left in his savings, he started going all over the mall and eating. Junli's previous world had been an apocalypse world. He hadn't been able to eat his fill the whole time. Then he had starved for 7 days in the basement. Now he wanted to eat everything he saw. So he used his points to equip an alternate dimension stomach that could only hold food, then began to stuff himself in the shopping mall. When he had finally eaten, to his psychological satisfaction, he passed by the arcade and heard an employee saying that there was an event today. If you accumulated 10,000 game tickets, you would be entered in a lottery. There was a grand prize hidden among the prizes. Junli, who was extremely sensitive to missions, thought that this must be a hint for the next mission. After getting the residence certificate, if he could only win the grand prize, the prize would definitely be a hint towards the final boss. This world really was dangerous. Luckily, he was careful and prudent. Wearing his showy and alluring clothes, Junli played whack-a-mole for a while in the arcade. He was pretty good at games, but you couldn't win many tickets playing whack-a-mole, and he was tired of playing it. So he got up, left the whack-a-mole machine, and followed a native at random. The person he was following went to the basketball throwing area. Basketball. Junli got out his game tokens. My throwing technique is pretty good. I can play that next. While Zhengping was in a dilemma, not knowing whether to keep his eyes fixed on the mission target or to follow Yǒuyù, he saw Junli get up and follow Yǒuyù to the basketball game area. Yǒuyù chose a basketball game machine and carefully picked up basketball. He looked hesitantly at the hoop, then slowly tossed the basketball. The basketball flew up vertically for about a meter, then fell down. Never mind getting into the hoop. It didn't even getting to the shooting area. At this point, Junli, who was standing next to him, had already made several shots. Junli pumped his fist. Hey! He really was a perfect shot. Yōuyù tossed the second basketball. This time, the basketball struggled to the shooting area and fell without touching the hoop. Junli noticed the native playing the same game next to him and stopped to watch Yōuyù shooting hoops. He couldn't resist laughing out loud. Yōuyù knew he looked bad now. Since coming to this world, his temper had always been good. He'd never quarreled with anyone. Hearing that someone was laughing at him, Yōuyù slowly turned his head to look at him, so that he looked young, probably still only a student, and he didn't make an issue of it. Young people always had to show off a little. Yōuyù remembered that Zhengping had also had that kind of temperament when they had just started dating. He and his friends would fool around in the car, making fun of each other. When the two of them had parted ways after the blind date, Yōuyù had secretly followed Zhengping. When they'd parted, he had mentioned wanting to see Zhengping home, and Zhengping had refused, saying that it would be embarrassing for a grown man to be seen home. Yōuyù had considerately not insisted, but when Zhengping had left, he had stealthily followed. After all, Zhengping was too delicate. An ordinary pair of scissors, composed of iron and carbon, could wound his skin. Yōuyù had never seen such a soft and adorable human. He was worried about Zhengping going home on his own. From a distance, he saw Zhengping come up beside the off-road car. Xiānshēng and the others got out of the car, took off Zhengping's wig, and pointed at his rainbow-colored head, laughing loudly. Zhengping wasn't taking this lying down. He held down their heads and gave them a beating, then snatched away the spray and dye and sprayed all of their hair. Everyone had rainbow-colored heads. No one could make fun of anyone else. Xiānshēng was very vain, and he put stock in attractiveness index, so he couldn't measure up to Zhengping. Having this done to his hair still made him livid. He quickly got out a little knife, and with the help of his friends, he shaved off patches of Zhengping's hair. In the end, no one got the best of it. They went together to the hairdressers to get their heads shaved clean and wait for their hair to slowly grow back. Looking at their relaxed laughing faces and casual closeness as they played around, Yōuyù was very envious. Zhengping, surrounded by his friend, getting held down and having his head shaved, seemed to be glowing. Yōuyù yearned for the friendship Zhengping and his friends had. He knew there was no way for him to ever integrate with others, but there was nothing to be done. He would protect Zhengping, protect their friendship. That way, it would be like he had it too. Clearing his head of his brief recollection, Yōuyù nodded to Zhengli, who was laughing at him, then uncaringly picked up the third basketball to train his strength. He didn't care about being laughed at, but Zhengping was furious. Zhengli was a destroyer. Not only was he threatening the world, he was also laughing at Zhengping's husband. It was simply unbearable. The peacock has his eye on the chick. I can't sit around being a sitting duck, Zhengping said to his companions over the walkie-talkie. Peacock was code for this mission's target, and chick was code for a protector's family member. These terms were all part of the protector's coded language. Only they could understand it. You can approach the peacock, but you can't provoke him. You have to protect the safety of the chick and all the birds, Zhengping ordered. All the birds meant the ordinary people in the mall. So Zhengping, wearing the handsome uncle's face, went up next to Zhengli, stared at him, then said, "Young man, you shoot very accurately. Would you like a contest?" He wanted to take a risk, getting close to Zhengli, find leaks in Zhengli's conversation, and infer the destroyer's true aim. When Zhengli saw Zhengping, his eyes lit up. As expected, there would be a prompt after he went into the arcade. It seemed that if he beat this man, he could get a clue about the final boss. The three of them were standing in a row. Zhengli and Zhengping went into contest mode, while next to them, Yōuyù slowly picked up basketballs, tossed, missed, tossed, missed. Finally, a basketball touched the hoop. Yōuyù pumped his fist happily. He had finally found the knack of controlling his strength. Next to him, Zhengli picked up 5 basketballs at once and said to Zhengping, "I didn't expect you to be so awesome. You threw 4 basketballs at once, and they all went in. Let's do 5. But Zhengping looked past Zhengli at Yōuyù's glad look at getting the basketball to touch the hoop. He couldn't resist wiping the corner of his eye. His Yōuyù really had suffered too much lately. Chapter 7. Because Zhengli and Zhengping had accomplished the magnificent feat of getting 3 basketballs in at once, quite a few of the people strolling around the arcade had come over to the basketball area to watch the 2 great masters shoot hoops. By the time the 2 of them got 5 balls in at once, there was a large audience watching the worldwide basketball throwing championship. There was even someone recording it with their phone and posting it online. In the recording, a very attractive young man wearing a glistening green jacket was competing at shooting hoops with a handsome uncle with a perfect figure, whose face showed the marks of time. These 2 people's attractiveness, bearing, and technique were all first-rate. As soon as the recording was posted, it was instantly reposted countless times. And among the characters in the recording, sometimes a figure would appear. This person's attractiveness and figure were in no way inferior to the other two, but his shooting technique was appalling. The sharp-eyed netizens discovered this person. First I was sighing over the two great masters' faces, the two great masters' techniques. When I was getting ready to kneel, I saw that person in the corner of the recording, and I stood back up. I may not measure up to the great masters, but I am better than next door. The three of them are standing in a row. Could I ask that person who can't get the ball into the hoop, no matter what he does, what gave him the courage to fight alongside two gods? Probably because of his attractiveness. After all, the three of them are all just as handsome. If we're talking about attractiveness, I have to kneel again. I have no way to attain that kind of attractiveness. Everyone is cheering for the two great masters' technique. Was I the only one cheering when the hot guy next to them pumped his fist when he finally got the basketball to touch the hoop? Poor guy, don't you see how hard he's trying? I'm also cheering for next door. He looked so adorable when he pumped his fist in celebration. Go, handsome, go. While your technique can't measure up to the other two, you won't lose to them in attractiveness. I looked at the address, and it's at the shopping mall down the street from me. I'm dropping the unfinished hot pot in front of me to rush to the arcade to look at the hot guys. What's important isn't how good their basketball technique is. It's how good their faces are. I'm dropping my Häagen-Dazs to come. What the hell is it doing, keeping me from looking at hot guys? I'm dropping my movie ticket to come. What the hell? The actors aren't as good looking as the basketball playing hot guys. As the recording spread, many people at the mall came to the arcade. When Zhengli was struggling to hold 6 basketballs with 2 hands, there were cheers and applause all around. Hearing the surrounding voices, Yōuyù looked around himself and saw that he was surrounded by people whistling and cheering. It made Yōuyù feel instantly uneasy. He didn't like the feeling of being surrounded by people. He didn't want to attract attention, and he was only a social failure who had lost his job. If Zhengping found out he hadn't gone to look for work, but had instead gone to fool around at the arcade, Zhengping would definitely be hurt. Yōuyù knew that Zhengping would never think he was useless. His husband was willing to wage war on the world for him. Before they were married, Yōuyù had asked Zhengping if Yōuyù couldn't earn money one day, what would they do? Zhengping had answered, "What are you scared of? When the time comes, I'll go out and do physical labor to support you. I'm very strong." Then he had flexed his arms at Yōuyù to show off his biceps. Zhengping had seen Yōuyù smiling in disbelief and had taken him to the gym, lifting a 100-pound barbell, one-handed, indicating that if he went to do physical labor, he would definitely be able to earn a lot of money. Yǒuyù had only been asking in passing. Who could have known that Zhengping was so earnest that he really had considered the possibility and wanted to support him with a strength that could lift 100-pound barbell one-handed. Yǒuyù had felt then as though he had been wrapped in soft and steady warm water. He had quietly indulged himself for a few seconds, enjoying the gentleness coming from Zhengping. But he didn't want Zhengping to support him, and he especially didn't want his husband to discover that he wasn't attending to his proper duties. Yǒuyù put down the basketball, looked at the crowd, then quietly turned and left the basketball area. The observing crowd was disappointed to see him leave. Someone even wanted to urge him to stay. Yǒuyù saw there was someone blocking his way and lowered his eyes slightly to look at this person. The look in his eyes was cold and distant. It made the person who wanted to encourage Yǒuyù to stay immediately back up a few steps, not daring to try speaking to him again. The handsome uncle, Zhengping, had been holding 6 basketballs and planning to show the destroyer Yǔyì how mighty the protectors were. But when Yǒuyù left, Zhengping suddenly lost interest in relative superiority. He dropped the basketballs and said, "I really can't manage 6 basketballs. You win." The young people around them called, "Uncle, you haven't tried yet. Try it. Maybe you can do it." Being called uncle for the first time, Zhengping touched his face uneasily and said, "I've gotten old. I'm not as fit as a young man anymore." Then he picked up the suit jacket lying on the shelf next to him and casually draped it over himself. The sleeves of the ink-patterned shirt were rolled up, showing thin but powerful arms. Zhengping put one hand in his pocket and held the jacket with the other hand. He looked like he was easily conceding defeat. In fact, he wanted to chase Yǒuyù. "Wait," Zhengli panicked. "What about his clue? Wasn't he supposed to get a clue if he won?" Seeing Zhengli holding him back, Zhengping turned alertly, wondering whether this destroyer wanted to use the safety of all the people around them to threaten him. The look in Zhengping's eyes sharpened, his expression filling with danger. The destroyer was already right in front of him. Even if he wanted to hurt the people around him, Zhengping would be able to drop him in his space. Zhengping was a rare special ability user. He could imprison or protect a person in his spaces. The Protector's leadership had been extremely pleased and surprised when they had discovered Zhengping. Before, the issue that the Protectors had been most worried about had been destroyers hurting ordinary people. But Zhengping could drop a destroyer inside a space, and he could also use the spaces to protect ordinary people. His ability was made for protection. At such a close distance, Zhengping was certain of being able to capture Yǔyì. But there were too many people around, and there was still someone filming. He didn't want to cause more problems, so he smiled easily, imitating Yōuyù. Was there something else? Zhengli took a deep breath, got out his phone, and said, "How about we friend each other and swap pointers another time?" Saying a name involuntarily, extending an olive branch. The surrounding observers began to clap wildly. From time to time came a girl's yell of, "I ship it, I ship it." Zhengping saw that Yōuyù had already gone far away. He didn't know where he had gone. He blinked, covering up the struggle and suffering in his heart. He wanted so much to be by Yōuyù's side, to comfort him, to encourage him, to make his husband cheer up. But that wouldn't do. He was a protector. He couldn't abandon his work. He had to eliminate these vicious destroyers. Zhengping blinked again, his expression steadying once more. He put his arm around Zhengli's shoulders and warmly said, "It doesn't have to be another time. Do you have time now? Let me get you something to eat." "Here it comes," Zhengli thought happily. When they were alone, would the middle-aged be able to tell him the clue? He turned and waved to the observers, saying, "This gentleman and I are going to exchange tips. Everyone scatter. We'll arrange to meet another day." "Exchange what tips?" someone jeered. "Basketball or something else?" Zhengping composed his expression, thinking, "I'm a married person. What's with the shipping? How infuriating. He sacrificed so much for work." Fortunately, the ordinary-looking Xiānshēng and other underlings were concealed among the crowd. They took the lead. "They've met someone who can appreciate their talents. What are you all gawking at? You can participate when you can get 5 basketballs into the hoop." The underlings worked very hard to disperse the crowd. Zhengping took Zhengli's hand and smiled faintly. "What do you want to eat?" "Whatever you want. The important thing isn't the food, it's the clue." Zhengli thought excitedly as he shook hands. Arm around Zhengli's shoulders, Zhengping took him as far as possible from the crowd. When they left the arcade, he suddenly discovered Yōuyù buying scratch-and-win lottery tickets at a lottery ticket stand in a corner. He was so upset, he nearly cried. Fortunately, he had received specialized training and succeeded in covering up his true feelings. Not giving anything away, Zhengping walked by a restroom with Zhengli. Xiānshēng had just told him in secret that they had already gotten everyone out of that restroom. He could act. "I'll go wash my hands first, after touching the basketballs," Zhengping said, pointing naturally to the restroom. "I'll go too." Zhengli raised his eyebrows. There seemed to be no one in the restroom. It was rather suitable for talking about clues. The two of them went in together. Zhengping stood in front of the sink, looking at Zhengli in the mirror. Not giving anything away, he said, "Your shooting technique really is good. What work do you do? Does it have to do with basketball?" "No, I'm just an ordinary student," Zhengli said, remembering the materials the system had given him. Basketball is only a hobby. Really? Zhengping said calmly. Today is a weekday. Don't you have class? Here came the choice. Zhenli's class schedule showed that he has many classes today, but instead he was amusing himself at the arcade. Should he acknowledge that he was cutting class, or should he find an excuse? I'm cutting class, Zhenli resolved to gain the man's faith with sincerity. Maybe I had some mystical sense that I would meet you today, and that's why I came to the arcade. No good. He couldn't control his impulse to beat this person up anymore. Xiānshēng was just then reporting the circumstances to their superiors. When he received permission, he said to Zhengping, "Boss, the higher authorities have approved you to take him alive." After all this time, Zhengping had finally gotten permission. He pressed down on the back of Zhenli's neck with his palm. Really, I also think it was fate. Then his palm firmly gripped Zhenli. At the same time, his thoughts moved, and he released a space that only had enough room in it to contain one person, firmly trapping Zhenli inside. To prevent against Zhenli using something like a special ability to escape, Zhengping's hand was also closed up in the space. "Done," Zhengping said. Xiānshēng and the others charged into the restroom and saw that Zhengping's right hand had vanished in mid-air. Xuyang waved his hand a few times in the place where Zhengping's right hand had been, saying in wonder, "Are Zhenli and your hands here?" "Yes," Zhengping said, frowning. "He's using a heat weapon to attack my hand. It hurts a little. Let's hurry back to the base." "Why can't we see your hand or touch it if it's still in the same place?" Xuyang asked. "It's a parallel space. Things I put in the spaces exist in a space and time parallel to us. It's not that I create an invisible space, it's that I open a space separate from this world," Zhengping explained with some satisfaction. "And all abilities would be weakened to less than 1/10 of their power in these spaces." Zhenli, trapped in the space, seemed to be attacking his hand with a gun. With the restriction of the space, Zhengping only felt a slight pain. He wasn't seriously injured. Despite this, if Zhenli used too fearsome a weapon, Zhengping's hand might still not be able to withstand it. They had to return to the base as soon as possible. Director Xiao had ordered them to do their best to take the destroyer alive. Their world had been safe for 15 years. A destroyer appearing again meant that something was wrong. They had to think of a way to learn the reason from the destroyer. Even though destroyers who were questioned might commit suicide, they still had to try. They quickly took Zhenli back to the base. This was an underground base that could withstand a nuclear bomb. Director Xiao and other formerly illustrious protectors put on face-changing masks and nodded to Zhengping. Zhengping opened his space, letting Zhengli out. At this moment, Zhengli's rather good-looking face was covered in tears. He was too careless. How could a world where all the levelers had been lost be so simple to solve? It was a trap. It was all a trap. He looked hatefully at the handsome uncle who had caught him. Who are you people? I don't have any money. Why did you kidnap me? Zhengli knew that the chief deity didn't permit levelers to tell the world's natives about the system. If the levelers were questioned, the device the chief deity had planted in their heads would force them to commit suicide. So he had to pretend that he didn't know anything. He absolutely couldn't reveal his identity. Was this person stupid? The handsome uncle Zhengping sighed and raised his injured hand, saying, I used the space to catch you, and you use a heat weapon to shred my hand to bits. At this point, are you still pretending to be an ordinary person? Director Xiao shook his head. This was the worst grade of destroyer he had ever seen. It was fortunate Zhengping's performance had far surpassed his imagination. Each time he saw Zhengping and Yǒuyù together, Director Xiao would think that perhaps this protector that the country had focused on educating was already past his prime. But the abilities Zhengping had demonstrated in this action were admirable. It seemed he was only an idiot in love. He was stupid in front of Yǒuyù, but the rest of the time he was quite normal. You already know my identity, Zhengli said hopelessly. How could you know my identity? Did that final big boss send you? I'm really stupid. I thought you were there to give me a clue. I didn't think you were an enemy. Of course it's a final mission. How could a newbie like me pass? I'm a goner. He couldn't take the pressure anymore and began to wail. While the protectors joined forces to grill Zhengli, Yǒuyù at home had used all his strength to make dinner and was waiting quietly for Zhengping to come home when he received a message from Zhengping. The Public Security Bureau is short on field personnel. We're going to help. I'm working overtime today. I may not come home. Yǒuyù put down his phone and looked at the table full of food, feeling a little sad. From the time when they had gotten married to now, Zhengping had always been idle, arriving home precisely on time. He had never worked overtime. Yǒuyù thought he must think him under too much stress. He voluntarily requested overtime to earn extra money. It was because Yǒuyù was useless. As Yǒuyù was reflecting bitterly, his new phone lit up. A familiar interface appeared spontaneously on the phone. Yǒuyù unlocked the phone and saw a mission prompt. A leveler has been captured by locals. Clearer 001 is requested to rescue this leveler as soon as possible, or else the system will use the arrested leveler to publicize Clearer 001's identity in this world. The time limit is 24 hours. Chapter 8. Yōuyù stared at his phone for a while. There were no waves in his heart. Like before, he put Zhengping's tableware in the place where his husband usually sat, and saw Zhengping were there across from him, calmly enjoying his dinner. After eating his own meal, Yōuyù got up and went to Zhengping's seat and ate all of his husband's food as well. After eating two people's food on his own, Yōuyù sat in Zhengping's seat, recalling his long thousands of years of loneliness. Eating his own food just now, Yōuyù had looked at the empty seat across from him and felt very lonely. He'd come over to Zhengping's seat, wanting to create the illusion that both of them were there, but in the moment he'd sat in that chair, he had felt even more alone, because Yōuyù had found that even his own seat was empty. He had turned on the TV, the voice of the news anchor, and the sound of chopsticks lightly touching the bowl had reverberated inside the room. Under the lively background noise, the room had seemed to be empty. Now the news broadcast ended, and the sound of the weather forecast fisherman's song began, following a gurgle of flowing water. Yōuyù calmly washed the dishes. Yōuyù liked the weather forecast's background music. This tune gave him a kind of feeling of calm contentment. He liked to wash the dishes to the sound of the fisherman's song, from time to time looking at the Zhengping sprawled on the couch, enjoying the memory of dinner. Or he would look out the window at the setting sun. These comfortable, languid scenes made Yōuyù feel that he was truly living. Yōuyù had lived for thousands of years, striving each day to clear. He had known countless varied and grotesque worlds, experienced unnumbered dangers. He'd once had teammates. These people had either died in cruel survival games, or they had had different ideas from him and had gradually drifted away. He'd wanted to defeat the system, to possess supreme power. He had walked forward to the great road to freedom, losing countless friends, getting himself battered and bloody. He had looked up at the starry sky, struggling for the sake of one goal. When he had at last succeeded and become the first clearer, able to possess endless life and power, Yōuyù had turned his head, looked at the road he had walked, and found that there was only loneliness at the end of this road. As soon as he had thought that there would be countless more days like this, that he would have to endure unending loneliness, Yōuyù had been afraid. Strange, when he had been weak and faced undefeatable enemies, he had been able to summon boundless courage. But when he had become so strong that no one could oppose him, Yōuyù had been frightened of the endless life ahead, and frightened of himself on the point of becoming emotionless. While struggling towards a difficult goal, he had always shirked life, shirked an ordinary person's trivial reality. So Yōuyù had made his final wish. He wanted to become an ordinary person, going briefly but peacefully and truthfully through one last life. That was the end he had chosen for himself. When the dishes had been washed, the weather forecast ended. Yōuyù turned off the TV. In the quiet room, he picked up his phone once more. There were two choices before him. Choice 1 was to listen to the system's command, rescue or kill that leveler, and be controlled by the system from then on, gradually living his current life, sooner or later changing back into what he had been at the beginning. Choice 2 was to ignore the system and let it reveal his identity. When the time came, could he still live a peaceful life with Zhengping like before? Yōuyù didn't want either of these. Yōuyù immediately eliminated choice 1 and considered what method the system would use to publicize his identity after he refused. This wasn't an open world. Yōuyù had originally chosen this world because he knew the system had no way to control it entirely. So the system had no way to broadcast information openly in this world. Even if it did broadcast the information, it wasn't certain that anyone would believe it. The only thing the system could do was to use the leveler's mouth to reveal his identity. Yōuyù had had dealings with the system for so many years. He knew that the system couldn't turn an unopened world's people into levelers. All levelers were randomly collected by the system from the worlds it controlled completely. The system was dedicated to making the levelers open new worlds for the sake of expanding its sphere of influence. Therefore, the only person who could expose his identity was the leveler, the one who had apparently been captured by the locals. The only way to make the leveler keep his mouth shut seemed to be to kill him, but that was precisely what the system wanted. Yōuyù didn't want that. It seemed that at the moment there was only one thing to do. Yōuyù pressed on the newly downloaded system app. The app had no option to uninstall it. The option also didn't appear in the phone's user settings. The wireless system had shut off the phone's uninstall function and was constantly reminding Yōuyù that he had an uncompleted mission. Yōuyù bit through his right and index finger and dripped flesh blood onto the phone's screen. The drop of blood fell on the app. When he pressed on the app this time, the option to uninstall finally appeared. Yōuyù clicked uninstall. The system warned him, if the mission is not completed within 24 hours, Clearer 001's identity will be exposed. Clearer 001 is requested to carefully consider whether to uninstall this system. I won't consider, Yōuyù said firmly. After uninstalling the system, Yōuyù clearly felt his own power strengthening again. In order to uninstall the app, he had forced an ability to unlock. This made the power he had managed to get accustomed to soar again. Yōuyù stood in front of a mirror and reached out his injured index finger. There was still blood on the finger. Pressing hard, Yōuyù smeared the blood on the mirror. Zhengli was being grilled by the protectors. He had just carelessly revealed his identity and told them about the final big boss in this world. He thought he was a goner for sure this time. The system didn't permit clearers to reveal things concerning itself. As soon as they let it out, the clearers would self-destruct. After letting out the fact about the final big boss, Julie hugged his own arms in fear and tearfully said, "Stop asking, I'm going to self-destruct." Director Xiao and the rest of the older generation of protectors had experience. They knew that the force of a destroyer self-destructing would be very strong. Hearing Julie say this, everyone quickly retreated from the sturdy room and watched Julie over the surveillance feed. 1 minute, 2 minutes, half an hour passed, and Julie hadn't self-destructed. He was curled up and nagging himself as though he was dying, looking pitiful. Zhengping couldn't resist saying, "Is he really a destroyer? Maybe he's just an idiot. Have we got the wrong person?" Older studies had taught them that destroyers were frightening and extremely dangerous, but this one seemed pathetic. I'm not very certain either. He seems different from previous destroyers. Even Director Xiao was doubtful. He just revealed the fact that there's a frightening destroyer hiding in this world, but he didn't self-destruct like before. Could he really be just an ordinary person with delusional disorder? How could that be? Zhengping raised his damaged hand. My hand was seriously injured when I captured him with the space. Did he do this with his teeth? It looks kind of like cigarette burns, Zhengping said, looking closely. Abilities trapped in my spaces are reduced to 1/10 of their power. If you multiply this power by 10, you get a firearm, Zhengping said, pointing to his hand, saying that a long time had passed and Julie hadn't self-destructed. The protectors carefully returned to the room. Julie saw that they had returned and he hadn't died. He thought that he was about to suffer an unknown amount of torture. He was scared. Just as Zhengping and the others came in, Julie looked up and suddenly saw a mirror floating in midair in front of him. These words were written on the mirror in blood. "If you listen to my instructions, you'll live." Julie thought he was hallucinating. He rubbed his eyes and saw the words change. "Pretend you can't see the mirror and act according to my instructions, or else I'll kill you." There was also a bloody dagger at the end of these words. The point of the dagger was aimed at Julie. Julie sucked in a breath, faced the protectors questioning him, wiped away his tears, and said according to the instructions, I'll tell you everything." Director Xiao and the other old protectors exchanged looks. This was their first time seeing such a cooperative destroyer. Their vigilance rose. "You couldn't write too many words on the mirror. Yǒuyù only wrote the general idea and left Junli to make up the rest himself. Luckily, Junli knew how to make up a story. He combined his own real situation with the mirror's prompting and obediently related. About 7 days ago, a new program appeared on my phone. I couldn't uninstall it. It told me I had to fulfill a mission, and if I failed, I would be wiped out. At this point, Julie quaked internally, saying this amounted to revealing the system's secrets. He would self-destruct after saying it, but the bloody words on the mirror had told him to set his mind at ease. So Julie did his best to keep calm. He hadn't thought that he really wouldn't die. Director Xiao picked up Junli's phone and used Junli's face to unlock it with facial recognition. He searched through the phone and said, "I don't see the app you told us about. I tried before. Other people can't see it, as though it's my secret," Junli said. "This week, I've been hiding at home, investigating the phone. I discovered that what the system says is true. This morning, I equipped an alternate dimension stomach, and I could eat a lot without gaining weight." The bloody words had instructed him to tell some of his true experiences concerning the system. He could mix truth and lies. Junli thought that he had been captured at the mall. So he talked about himself using the system at the mall. "I also used the system to equip a basketball throwing technique, though there was a time limit on it. It lost effects after an hour, and when you caught me, I used the laser gun ability to try to escape, but I failed." This matched perfectly with the results of Zhengping and the others' investigation. Director Xiao nodded and said, "What did the system tell you to do?" "It said that there was a big boss hidden in this world, and to protect the world, protect the ordinary people, I had to kill the big boss." Junli looked at all of them. The system also said that I would die if I failed the mission. If I revealed its secrets, I would also die. Are you the big boss's subordinates? Are you going to kill me? No, this destroyer's style was completely different from what they were familiar with. Chapter 9. How much of what he said was true, do you think? When the interrogation ended, Director Xiao left behind 2 team members to watch Junli, while the others went to a soundproofed room to discuss. Zheng Xiao cleaned up the transcript of the interrogation, printed it out, and gave each person a copy. A protector of similar age to Director Xiao said, "Truth mixed with lies, I think. He's a good liar." He laughed lightly, seeming to be fondly remembering the past. "This is my first time seeing such a stupid destroyer," adding in the fact that he voluntarily revealed the phone app. "And the final big boss, without self-destructing. Perhaps he really isn't a destroyer." The protectors weren't so easily fooled. They were battle-tried and had seen too many destroyers of all kinds. They had experienced every kind of trap. They wouldn't easily believe Junli's story. Director Xiao said, "I've had the technicians thoroughly test that phone countless times. They're certain the app Junli told us about isn't on it. I also had a protector who was skilled at detecting power investigated. He also didn't find any unusual power. Either the power in that phone is one we can't access, dark matter energy that can't be detected, or it's a hallucination. Hallucination, Zhengping's younger generation of protectors were at this meeting to look on and learn, to understand the destroyers according to their big shot elders' thoughts. At the same time, they could also put forward some creative suggestions. A protector wearing a xiānshēng suit turned on a projector and played a video. There were several different destroyers in the video. These were some representative segments chosen from the surveillance camera records of public places when the protectors had been tracking their movements after determining their identities. In the video, the destroyers simultaneously began talking to themselves and pointing at empty space, as though there was a giant screen in front of them. Through many years of analysis and exchanging information with each country's protection organization, we can determine that destroyers really do have a sort of control panel or system interface. This interface is planted in their brains and can appear in front of the destroyer's eyes when it's in use. Furthermore, only the destroyers themselves can see it. Director Xiang narrated for the young protectors. We've never seen a destroyer use a phone app to manipulate the interface. If everything Zhengli says is true, then either he isn't a destroyer or the destroyer's technology has deteriorated. Zhengping's brain turned rapidly. He remembered Zhenli's performance at the mall and instantly seized on 2 times. He pulled up the surveillance from inside the mall, cutting out images from those 2 times. The first time is at 10:03 a.m. After eating a hamburger on the first floor. Zhengli rubbed his belly, burped, and showed other signs of feeling full. But right after that, he went to the second floor to buy cake. After he got the cake, he didn't eat it immediately. Instead, he clicked on his phone many times and then started eating the cake. The resolution on the mall's cameras was very high. Zhengping found a camera that was facing the phone and enlarged the video. Everyone saw that Zhengli was wildly clicking and sliding on the phone's main screen, as though he were picking out a product. The main screen didn't change the whole time. When Zhengli had clicked heavily on the phone, as though he had finally made a decision, he started bolting down the cake. Then he went to 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors to buy food. From this, you can see that Zhengli was already full on the 1st floor, but he was still unsatisfied. He wanted to eat more, so he used the phone, paid some price, and got the ability to keep eating, Zhengping said. Then he found another video. It was at 12:54 p.m. The scene of Zhengping turned into an handsome uncle, going one-on-one at shooting hoops with Zhengli. Zhengping said, "My basketball throwing match with Zhengli increased from 1 ball at a time to 2 at a time, all the way to 5. When there were 2 basketballs, Zhengli hadn't touched his phone. When I increased the number of balls to 3, there was a trace of stiffness in his expression. Then he called a timeout. He told me then that he had to respond to a message and took out his phone. After he clicked on his phone a few times, it was as if his basketball technique had divine assistance. He wasn't even afraid when the number of basketballs went up to 5. I had to set up a space track to get 5 in at once. How was he doing it? Zhengping hadn't seen Zheng's phone during the basketball throwing competition. Looking through the Mo's surveillance now, he could clearly see that Zhengli hadn't been responding to a message. He had once again been repeatedly clicking aimlessly on the phone's main screen. The older protectors nodded. He really did use the phone to activate some abilities that probably requires some price, so he wouldn't use the abilities lightly. From these points, we can confirm that it's true that there's a mysterious app on the phone. The essential nature of both the phone app and the floating interface are beyond the technology and power we understand. Our current technology has no way to detect them, but judging from the change from an interface implanted in the brain to a phone app, we can see that the destroyer's technology level has deteriorated. Why would such a phenomenon take place? Director Xiao considered, then put forward his own view. 2 reasons. First, there was some special circumstance among the destroyers, an internal conflict or a natural disaster, and that's why no destroyers have appeared in our world for 15 years in a row. Having recovered from that period, the destroyers have come to our world again, but because of the special circumstance, their technology deteriorated, concretely expressed in the change in the interface and the destroyers being unable to self-destruct. Second, Zhengli isn't a destroyer. It's just an ordinary person from our world who was chosen and used by a destroyer to attain some goal. Both were possible. At present, they had no definitive evidence to determine which possibility was the greater likelihood, and as for how to handle Zhengli, that would depend on his identity. If Zhengli were a destroyer, then he was an enemy. The protectors would use torture to get him to talk, learn more information from him before he self-destructed. If Zhengli were being used, then he was a victim, and behind him there was a more frightening enemy. The protectors may choose to keep a protective watch on him. Zhengping reviewed the materials and video of Zhengli's interrogation over and over. He pressed pause at a certain time and said to his superiors, "Right here. Doesn't it seem like he's looking at a floating interface?" This was precisely when everyone had returned after leaving the room, due to concerns that Zhengli would self-destruct. Zhengli, staring at Zhengping, who had walked in first, rubbed his eyes. He seemed to be confirming Zhengping's identity, but looking closely, his eyes looked like they were moving from right to left. Instead of looking at Zhengping, it looked more like he was reading words written right to left. The protectors silently replayed the video of Zhengli's interrogation. Director Xiao snorted. If not for Xiaoyu's attentiveness, he would have pulled one over on us. I don't think his panic when he was caught was an act. Zhengli hadn't looked at the floating interface then. Only after he revealed information without self-destructing afterwards could he see the interface. The protector in the junction suit said. Everyone exchanged looks, feeling that everyone's views was unified. It wasn't that something had gone wrong with the destroyers, causing their technology to deteriorate. There was someone behind Zhengli, and that person was the destroyer. Question him again, Director Xiao said. Zhengli curled up and squeezed his eyes shut, remembering the last words he had read on the floating mirror after the protectors had left. Your reading words in midair will definitely be noticed when the surveillance footage is reviewed. They'll guess that someone is instigating you. When they question you the second time, you just have to invent a backstage manipulator based on the system, and they'll let you go and use you to lure in the hidden instigator. You'll be safe then. I won't give you any more hints. You have free rein. Would it really be like this mysterious person had said? Julie thought nervously. The people who had questioned him before came back into the room. Julie stood up in a dither and looked innocent. I really did tell you everything. Not one word was a lie. Really? Director Xiao said majestically. Then why didn't you tell us what you read in midair just now? Julie was surprised. He didn't cover up his expression at all, as though he had never thought that Director Xiao and the others would find out. In reality, he was astonished at the insightfulness of the person behind that mirror. That person wasn't even here, but they could still foresee so many things. They had even guessed how the other side would judge. Director Shah pulled up the video and explained everyone's analysis. He cried out, "If you dare to lie again, we'll execute you on the spot." Zhengping and the others cooperated with Director Shah, raising their guns and aiming them at Zhenli's head. Zhenli was terrified, but what he was afraid of wasn't the protectors. It was that person who could predict everything without being on the scene or showing themselves. He raised his hands and said, I'll tell you. There really was a person. No, I can't say for sure that it was a person. He installed an app on my phone and told me to act according to his orders. If I didn't do what he said, I would die. I could use the phone to equip some abilities, but there were restrictions, like the basketball throwing ability. I could only keep it for an hour, but the alternate dimension stomach I can use for 20 years. What I said before about the mission being to catch a big boss wasn't a lie. The app told me that if I found the big boss hidden in this world, I could win my freedom forever. Endless money, beautiful women, and superpowers. And I could have a wish granted. There's something I didn't say before. The app told me that I'm not the only one carrying out this mission. There are lots of people who want to kill the hidden big boss. Everyone is vying to complete the mission. Some people have formed a league. This time the protectors believed what Chun-Li was saying. Having analyzed it, they determined that the destroyers had divided into two forces. One side was the big boss Chun-Li talked about having to kill. Director Shao suspected that this big boss was that immense power from 15 years ago. It turned out that he hadn't left, but had been hiding in the world, from the beginning. The other side, meanwhile, was the destroyer behind Zhengli. Maybe it was one person, or maybe it was a group. They were hunting the powerful destroyer who had been in hiding for 15 years. This is intolerable. After reaching a conclusion, Director Xiao was mad enough to pound the desk. The destroyers are having a civil war and using our world as their battlefield. What do they think our world is? Zhengping clenched his fist and said, "Neither side is good, people. We can't let either force go. We must chase all of them out of our world." "Right," Director Xiao said solemnly. "I've determined to let Zhengli go temporarily. Let him act openly and do something eye-catching. This way, if there are other destroyers in our world, we can use Zhengli to lure them in." "Xiaoyu, Zhengli lives in the Xuyang district. It's within the scope of your jurisdiction. You have to secretly observe him. Keep in mind, you absolutely can't let him know your identity." Zhengping had always used the handsome uncle's face in contacting Zhengli. He and his underlings hadn't revealed their true features. Zhengli had no idea of their identities. "Yes, sir," Zhengping said, saluting. "I guarantee that I will accomplish this mission." Director Xiao said sincerely, "Also, I'm not worried about the other protectors, but you, Xiaoyu, you're a married person, and you live in the Xuyang district and have a very close relationship with your partner. You have two choices now. First, you can tell him the truth, and will carefully protect Yǒuyù once he understands the situation. When this is over, he'll be able to return to normal life. Second, you can keep concealing it, not letting a trace slip out. Previously, once Protector's family members found out the truth, they would follow their family members during battle out of concern. Then they would be taken by the destroyers as hostages. This led to heavy losses. Since then, we've stipulated that if a protector wants to marry, their spouse must undergo rigorous training by the organization before marriage. Of course, this rule led to marriage rates among protectors dropping greatly. You lived in a peaceful age. The rule had been relaxed by the time you were married. We didn't conduct ideological and political training for Yǒuyù. We can only adopt extreme protective measures." Zhengping stared blankly. He asked, "So, how long will it take for our mission to end?" "Unclear. This may be a battle lasting 10 years, 20 years, even a few generations," said Director Xiao. "If you don't want Yǒuyù to be cut off from the outside world, to be strictly guarded, then prepare to hide this from him your whole life." Zhengping covered his heart. Yǒuyù longed so much for a peaceful life. How could he put him into such a dangerous position? "I'll conceal it to the end," Zhengping said, painfully but firmly. "Fine," Director Xiao nodded. "I'll arrange for you to transfer to the Public Security Bureau as auxiliary police. That way, you'll be able to go out in the field anytime." "Oh, all right." Zhengping held back his tears. His and Yǒuyù's peaceful life was gone. but this was for the sake of better protecting their future and the futures of many other people. If Zhengping wanted everyone in the world to live peacefully, he had to undertake all of this. As Zhengping thought longingly of Yǒuyù, Yǒuyù himself was standing quietly in the bathroom, sending Zhengping a message. "It's already 1 in the morning. When will you be home?" Zhengping received the message, asked his superior for leave, and responded to the message, "I figure it'll be tomorrow afternoon. I've gone out of town for work." Receiving this message, Yǒuyù sighed in relief. That was fine. He could find someone to mount a new mirror before Zhengping came home. The mirror he had used to send messages had been unable to withstand his strength. It had shattered. With difficulty, Yǒuyù cleaned the shards of mirror. Looking at the wreckage of the mirror, he quietly decided that for the sake of his and Zhengping's peaceful life, he had to completely eradicate the system this time. Chapter 10. First thing next morning, the handsome uncle protector once again dropped Junli into his base, and he was returned in confusion to the Xuyang district, left in a park with no people in it. Junli blankly walked 2 circles around the park, so the elderly men and women taking their morning walks nearby and felt bewildered. Had he been let go just like that? Why had they let him go? Junli didn't understand it at all. Truthfully, Junli felt his intelligence wasn't up to following that master who had sent him messages through the mirror. He didn't understand what the master's next move was. So Junli, in the park, quietly said, "Sir, great master, senior, are you there? What should I do next?" For a while, he called out like a thief. An elderly man carrying a bird and wearing traditional dress was quietly watching Junli from off to the side. He spoke in a forced voice. I was exercising my voice." The elderly man smiled. "There aren't many young people who are up as early as you." The parrot that the elderly man was carrying flapped its wings and loudly said, "Great master, are you there? Great master, are you there?" Junli sucked in a breath. He'd been very quiet. How odd that the parrot heard him. He stiffened his face, got wireless earbuds out of his pocket, and put them in his ears. "Great master," he sports, "great master, are you there? Are you sleeping? What's my next step after my big move?" After some aimless play acting with the unconnected Bluetooth, Junli scratched his head towards the elderly man and smiled awkwardly. "I didn't get up early. I just haven't been to sleep yet. I thought, since it was morning anyway, I'd go right to the park to move around, then go to sleep after I ate." The elderly man shook his head and was about to say something when Junli quickly continued. "We young people have unhealthy living habits." The parrot repeated after Junli. "Unhealthy living habits, unhealthy living habits." Following his very imperfect cover-up, Junli trotted away from park. He had to find a mirror and contact the great master. When Junli left, the elderly man working in the park stared at his back, tapped the parrot's head, and said with a kindly smile, "Parrot, oh parrot, do you think he's really dumb, or playing dumb?" The parrot spread its wings and said, "Really dumb, really dumb. I also think he's really dumb." The elderly man stroked his mustache. He used too much force, tearing the fool's mustache off. "Really dumb, really dumb." The parrot hopped around in its cage. It wasn't clear whether it was mocking Junli or the elderly man who had torn off his mustache. After fleeing the elderly man, Junli returned to his underground little dark room in a flutter. He was starting to understand why so many levelers had been lost in this world. There were people with superpowers among the natives of this world. They were organized and disciplined, hidden in the crowd like ordinary people, so you couldn't take precautions against them. Maybe their individual strength wasn't great, but gathered together to safeguard the world, they could exert tremendous force. Unless the levelers overturned the whole world's power, they couldn't defeat this unknowably huge hidden organization. No wonder the system had been unable to open this world all along. So how had the big boss that the system wanted to destroy hidden himself in this world? Who was the person who had contacted him through the mirror? Did the target of the system's mission have a connection with the protection organization? Junli's head was full of question marks, and he couldn't find any answers. The great master had told him through the mirror that the protection organization had let him go to act as bait, to lure in the other levelers who had come to complete the mission. Then wouldn't his every move be harmful to the other levelers? Junli rubbed his chest. He understood that there were good people and bad people among the levelers, and there were many people who were as bewildered as he was. The levelers who had forced him to come to this unopened world to test the waters were bad people. Junli had no objection to cooperating with the World Protection Organization to get rid of those people. But there were also many more people trapped inside the system. They didn't want to hurt others, they only wanted to survive. They might choose to come fulfill the mission. Junli didn't want to harm these people. He went into the bathroom. There was a mirror over the sink. Junli quietly said towards the mirror, "Great Master, if you can see me through the mirror, can you tell me what to do next?" Junli waited for a long time. The mirror over the sink reflected his face. The housekeeping workman chatted with Yōuyù while mounting the mirror over the sink. "Why not change to a better mirror?" Yōuyù said, "If I change to a better mirror, it won't match the sink anymore. In a couple of years, I'll change them together." "Fair." The housekeeping workman aimed at the original mirror's position and got to work. Even though Zhengping had said he would only be home in the afternoon, Yōuyù was still uneasy. He thought that the faster the mirror was mounted, the sooner he could relax. So he had called the housekeeping company first thing in the morning and raised the price to have the workmen come earlier to mount it. After the mirror was mounted, Yōuyù would still have to think of a way to make this brand new mirror look worn. As he stared at the workman doing his work, someone outside used a key to open the apartment door. Zhengping, looking exhausted, had returned. As he opened the door, he said, "Yōuyù, I'm so hungry. Is the food ready? Why are there so many people in the house first thing in the morning?" Yōuyù had heard the sound of Zhengping taking out his keys. At the time, 3 plans to resolve this had flashed through his mind. First, shut the bathroom door and make the workman jump out of the bathroom window after mounting the mirror to avoid Zhengping. But he immediately remembered that he lived on the 26th floor. An ordinary person couldn't jump down from an altitude of a couple dozen floors. Second, get rid of the workman and destroy the corpse to dispose of the evidence. But he had contacted the housekeeping company. The police would be able to find him through the communication records. That definitely wouldn't work either. Furthermore, Yōuyù wasn't willing to harm ordinary people. Third, open the door before Zhengping walked in. Give him a warm kiss. Tell him that he hadn't made breakfast, and the 2 of them could go out to eat. This way, he could lure his husband away, and the workman could calmly do his work in the apartment. But then, there would be no one to settle the workman's account, and he wouldn't have time to take care of follow-up arrangements, making the new mirror look like the old one. In an instant, countless ideas flashed through Yōuyù's head. In the end, he didn't put any of them into practice. He watched without moving as Zhengping opened the door, arranged his facial muscles, and said with an astonished expression, "You're back so early. Didn't you say afternoon?" "We finished the mission early, so I can rest for a day." Zhengping peered towards the bathroom. "What's going on?" Yōuyù calmly said, "I accidentally broke the mirror last night. They came to mount the mirror. Under the circumstances, it could only come clean. If Zhengping asked how he had broken the mirror, he could dodge with some explanation, like his hand slipping. Anyway, things were always breaking at home. He had thrown the pulverized remains of the mirror away first thing in the morning, and had watched the garbage truck take the garbage away. No one would find out that the mirror had broken abnormally. But Zhengping didn't ask why he had broken the mirror. Instead, he took Yōuyù's hands in concern. "Glass shards are hard to deal with. Did you get hurt?" Zhengping carefully investigated Yōuyù's palms, the backs of his hands, his face, his neck, and all exposed skin. There was no use for Yōuyù's prepared excuse. He quietly watched Zhengping, his heart full of a warm current. Yōuyù softly said, "I was careful. It's fine." He wanted to yank his hands back, but Zhengping was holding them firmly. Yōuyù didn't dare to use too much force. He was afraid that if he yanked his hands back, he might tear Zhengping's arms off. That would be a tragedy. Zhengping had needed to work up a lot of courage to grab Yōuyù's hands. He was hiding things from Yōuyù and felt guilty. He didn't dare to use too much force. If Yōuyù had used just a bit of force, Zhengping wouldn't have dared to hold on to his husband. But Yǒuyù only gave one token struggle, not using force at all, giving Zhengping boundless courage. Gazing at Yǒuyù, he said, "The mirror breaking is no problem. You found a new one, and that does me. You've supported me for so long. I can work hard at my job to earn money. You've been in a bad mood lately, so I've been sad too." Yǒuyù's heart softened. He knew he had been deliberately giving Zhengping the cold shoulder lately, due to his trend increasing. The two of them hadn't had a good talk in a week. From the time they'd started dating to their marriage, they had always gotten along very well. There had never been a cross word spoken between them. With this inexplicable Cold War, the two of them both felt bad, each wanting to reconcile with the other. The reason for the Cold War wasn't important. The important thing was that they still cared about each other. The two of them got closer and closer. Yǒuyù was afraid of hurting Zhengping and only lightly touched his lips. Zhengping had a spontaneous and enthusiastic nature. Seeing Yǒuyù hold out an olive branch, he quickly scrambled to take advantage, hugging Yǒuyù and preparing for a French kiss. Then he heard someone say, "Well, the mirror's been mounted. The mirror and work together cost 200 yuan. With an outsider present, two of them quickly separated, blushing. Zhengping hurried to be the first to fish out his phone to transmit payment. Yǒuyù was half a bit behind, because he was worried about crushing Zhengping's hand. The repairman collected his tools, and before leaving added, "I'm going, you two carry on." Having missed their chance, the two of them didn't feel comfortable carrying on. Zhengping wasn't opposed to going on during the day, but Yǒuyù was reserved. It would be better to exercise some restraint and wait until night. "I'll go cook," Yǒuyù said cheerfully. "No need, you're the one cooking every day. Today I'll invite you out for breakfast," Zhengping said. "All right," Yǒuyù said readily. Very good. He had been worried about breaking dishes in front of his husband. The two of them went to a breakfast restaurant. Yǒuyù didn't get involved, letting Zhengping pick out breakfast and bring it to the table. Yǒuyù looked at the fragile single-use chopsticks and smiled without moving, only looking at Zhengping. But Zhengping misunderstood. He was wildly happy. Was Yǒuyù acting spoiled today? During the 4 years they had spent together, it had always been Zhengping shamelessly acting spoiled. The composed Yǒuyù had never revealed his childish side. Today he seemed a little willful. It was a very novel feeling. Zhengping was delighted. He picked up soup dumpling and fed it to Yǒuyù. Yǒuyù had been planning to say he wasn't hungry and would be happy to watch Zhengping eat. He hadn't expected his husband to voluntarily undertake the task of using the tableware. This made Yǒuyù exceedingly joyful. It seemed that he could eat his fill during this meal. He opened his mouth and ate the soup dumpling Zhengping was feeding to him. Seeing two grown men playing the exciting game of feeding each other, the people in the breakfast restaurant couldn't stand to look directly at them. They all lowered their heads over their food, having been fed a belly full of dog food. In the middle of this, Zhengping and the other underlings, who all had no families and nothing to do, and who hadn't slept all night, also came to the breakfast restaurant. This was the regular restaurant. Usually, when they'd been up all night, they would all come here to eat breakfast, then go put their heads down and sleep all day. Zhengping, however, had been eating the food Yōuyù cooked at home since getting married. He rarely went out to eat. Oh my goodness! Zhengping covered his eyes, unable to stand its sight, and said, "Can you pay attention to the impression you're making? Look at how uncomfortable Yōuyù is." Zhengping had been smiling happily at Yōuyù. Seeing his crowd of underlings, he coldly said, "Don't hog the table. There's space at the next one." "No, I want to sit here," Zhengping yawned, deliberately sitting next to Zhengping. "I'm watching you two." Zhengping very much wanted to smack Zhengping to death, but with Yōuyù next to him, he couldn't reveal his true nature. He could only clench his teeth and say with a fake smile, "You're just itching for a spanking, aren't you? Don't you see that I'm in a two-person world after finally restoring good relations? If you're not using your eyes, donate them to someone who needs them." Not to be outdone, Zhengping pointed at all the people in the breakfast restaurant. "You call this a two-person world? You're the one who should go donate his eyes." The underlings crowded themselves around the not very large table, ordered a stack of food, and started to eat with great relish. Yōuyù had always envied Zhengping's intimate relationship with his friends. He had also had this once. He had had brothers who had fought shoulder to shoulder with him. With the passage of time, everyone had either been parted from him by death or drifted away. That brotherhood had vanished without a trace long ago. Before meeting Zhengping, Yōuyù had passed 15 years. Like stagnant water in this world, he had experienced too many worlds. No matter how many beautiful things he saw, he wouldn't jump for joy. The passing years had worn his feelings away in the gravel of time, dissolving them in endless missions. When he had cleared, Yōuyù had experienced neither happiness, nor anger, nor grief, nor joy, only endless weariness, until that day when he had been outside the off-road car and seen Zhengping fighting with his companions and climbing out the window. Yōuyù's emotions had been moved. He had remembered his own purest times. Only then did Yōuyù learn that his emotions hadn't disappeared and his memories hadn't been forgotten. These fine and simple feelings had only been hidden too deep, so deep he had been unable to dig them up himself. By sheer luck, he had met Zhengping, met this colorful young man who had awakened Yōuyù's purest feelings. The system had once again reached its evil clutches towards this world. He had to protect these young people's happiness. "I was just making a public display of affection. We've been married for 3 years. I have the legal right to a display." As he argued with Zhengping, Zhengping picked up a stuffed bun and shoved it into Yōuyù's mouth, crowding all of Yōuyù's deep sentiments out of his head. leaving him with only a mouthful of meat bone. Have some dignity. You're polluting my eyes. Xiānshēng furiously picked up a Yōuyù and stuffed it into the mouth of Xuyang next to him. I'm legally feeding my brother. How does my beloved brother feel? Being fed a mouthful of Yōuyù, Xuyang bit his chest, saying, I am choking. Xiānshēng picked up soy milk and poured it in Xuyang's mouth. Zhengping picked up a bowl of congee. Yōuyù quickly waved his hand, saying, I'm not choking. You're feeding me very well. It's fine. Then Zhengping put down the bowl of congee and looked at Xiānshēng in satisfaction. Did you see that? My technique is better than yours. Damn it, I lost. Xiānshēng said dismally to Xuyang. It's all your fault for not eating as fast as you were. The victim, Xuyang said, could you be reasonable? After making a racket throughout the whole meal, everyone went to their respective homes to catch up on sleep. Yōuyù told Zhengping that he had to go look for work and left home. When he went out the door, the smile on Yōuyù's face disappeared. He took a small makeup mirror out of his pocket and wrote in the mirror, I'm coming to you.